Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan Berryman. I'm an ETL developer, and this is the New York City Sidewalk Cafe project and the data warehouse. Let's begin. So what is a New York City Sidewalk Cafe? A sidewalk cafe in New York is basically a cafe that's situated between two businesses on the left or right, or possibly even apartment complexes above them. So in the city of New York, it's a very high population, and there's a large population density in a very small area. And because of that, the cost of living and honestly the cost of square footage that's available is very, very, very expensive. So for small cafes like the one you see in this image here, it's very difficult for a small business like this to be able to expand on the existing property that they have. Why? Because you can see there's buildings and apartments on the left, right, and above it. They won't be able to expand that way. And to be able to move to a larger unit is going to also cost a lot more money. And it's not a very viable solution for businesses to try to expand on their existing unit in a very high population dense city like New York. And to be able to accommodate that, what happened was these small businesses and the city of New York began to work together on being able to use the existing sidewalk space as part of the business to allow different customers and clients to be able to come in and enjoy the goods and services that these cafes have to offer. In this image, you can even see people just standing outside and using makeshift seating just to be able to have a cup of coffee. So when this came to light and people wanted to take more advantage of the sidewalk space, businesses wanted to take more advantage of the sidewalk space to be able to service their customers, it was a great idea, but there was also a lot of regulation that needed to be put into place just so these businesses can be serviced and so that it doesn't affect the regular population of New York, because a lot of New Yorkers use the sidewalk space to get from point A to point B. If you've ever been to New York, nobody likes to drive in the city. Usually it's bus transport or subways and trains. So that being said, these sidewalk cafe expansions onto the sidewalk have to go through multiple different municipalities to get approved. They would have to go through city planning commissions, get approval from the mayor's office, the city council, and even sometimes have to go through hearings to be able to determine if the amount of square footage this business is asking for is appropriate and will not affect pedestrian walkways. So when you really dive deeper into the issue of how populated New York City is, more than 50% of New Yorkers use public transportation to get back and forth. And look at the image and just see there's really no space for a small business to take up the sidewalk and just put a couple seats there so people can have coffee when all these people are trying to just get to work. And without the proper placement, what will occur is these cafes can go ahead and start impeding pedestrian walkways. You can see on the lower image, even the gentleman in the wheelchair is just trying to get across the street, and there's two people blocking him just because of where those the tables and the chairs were situated on that sidewalk. So because of this, a lot of regulation and a lot of approvals needed to be done to be able to expand onto the sidewalk, just to get a permit to be able to expand onto the sidewalk. And as these businesses are asking for the approvals and it's going through all the different stages, they would have to submit construction documents, determine the amount of tables, chairs, how much of the actual sidewalk space they're going to be taking up, and is there still going to be adequate space for pedestrians to be able to pass by, so they can still be able to serve businesses and still serve the public. Now, from everything I've said so far, it just sounds like a very lengthy process, yes? And that's exactly what the city of New York noticed. So if you look at this article from the Wall Street Journal, it became such a pain to get a single permit just to be able to put a couple chairs on that even the Wall Street Journal had to put an article out on how lengthy and costly the process was. So with this being an issue for the different municipalities, we were trying to find a solution for them to be able to kind of understand how they can best service these businesses so they can go ahead and get these permits in a non-lengthy and a more cost-effective way. And that way, the public will be able to still use the sidewalks and they'll be able to serve the public with their goods and services. So what we came up with is an ETL solution, to be able to take the data from these applications and that businesses are submitting, taking that application and putting it in through an ETL process, giving them an operational database to work on day-to-day stuff, right? To keep track of everything that's happening during day-to-day business transactions, and then also archive everything to be able to do analysis on it in a data warehouse, and for further insights to be able to use that data warehouse for predictions and reporting and other types of informative decision making. So some of the key performance indicators that we noticed that they needed were in a few factors, in a few different criteria. So the biggest issue being the time it takes for these permits to get approved. Everything revolved around time. So it would be one of the KPIs, for example, would be just understanding what the average time of permit issuance is, to be able to understand, as this permit taking longer than it should take compared to last year or the past 3 months. The average time of issuance and how it relates to hearings. How are hearings affecting the process of getting these permits approved? And the other final two are the impact of square footage on the amount of time it takes for applications to get approved. And lastly, understanding the minimum and the maximum times of issuance to be able to find applications which could be outliers, to understand and use them for different types of guidelines, so that the city municipalities can provide guidelines for these small businesses that they can follow to get their applications approved faster. So it won't be such a lengthy process. So to begin this, we started with the extraction portion, got the data from New York City OpenData.com in the form of a JSON file. I went ahead and used the OpenRowset script to go ahead and to view the data in the JSON file inside of SQL. Once I was able to view it there, I went ahead and I needed to put it in the staging area so I can really just have the information there and take a look at it and understand the different types of columns and data types I was working with. So I created a staging database, took the information from the JSON, put it into the staging database table, and took my time to do some preliminary data profiling just to understand what kind of data I was working with. And once I understood the type of data and data types that I was working with, I went ahead and started to try to group things together and a solid business logic that made sense. So what I did is I went ahead and I created an ODS for their operational day-to-day work, and I grouped everything into different types of municipalities for information and different types of steps and permits and hearings related to all the different municipalities. I separated them by hearings, things that would go to the mayor's office, and then a general table for applications and things. So what I did then is I took the information from my staging database, right? And before I put it into the ODS for operational use, I went ahead and did some transformations, like removing duplicates and creating some business logic for these for some of the columns. For example, like for application ID of some mandatory column and a record that needs to be in every single row. Otherwise, you won't be able to identify it. So, made sure that that business logic was in place before it got into the ODS. And once everything was in the ODS and was able to be loaded correctly, and now that I had all this clean data inside of the ODS, I was able to go ahead and start thinking about archiving it and moving it into a data warehouse. So for the final stage of loading it, I loaded everything into different dimension and fact tables with similar business logic. And most of the facts related to these applications were in the terms of dates and square footage. So the fact tables were fact date and fact square footage. The rest of them were very descriptive data, so kept those as the dimension tables. Individually loaded each one of these tables from the ODS database, and then went ahead and for the fact tables, I had to combine all the information from different ODS tables. So I used multiple lookups to go ahead and bring all the data into the fact tables. And in this case, I used the lookup because it wasn't very costly to use a lookup versus a merge transformation, because it wasn't that many records, and over time it wouldn't slow down. It wouldn't be very costly on performance, so I was able to just do it using lookup transformation. Next, data modeling, just making sure that we had the right relationships between the tables to make sure that for querying purposes that it's we can query the database much faster to get the information that we need. And then finally, from the information that I was able to get and put into the data warehouse, I was able to, look into these KPIs and understand how some of these KPIs affected the business. For example, in the case of hearings. So we were able to find out that the more applications that were being waived, the faster they were getting their permits approved, which made sense and very logical. What was interesting was that the amount of permits that were getting waived and how many were getting waived throughout the years. For example, it wasn't until 2017 and 2019 that the number of applications that were being waived, it had increased drastically, 6,800%, 6,850%. And then again, the applications started to go, it decreased, but there was more applications in 2019 where it only, after almost a 7,000% jump, it only went up to 200% increase in 2019. And if you look at the screenshot at the top right, you'll be able to see that the time of completion started to go down year after year from 2017 down to 2019. So these applications skipping or being waived from the hearing process did drastically improve how quickly these permits got approved. So what the municipalities would do would use that as a guideline to create guidelines for these businesses to follow in ways so that these businesses understand how to structure their applications to be able to get waived from the hearing process. Another thing that I was able to find was from the minimum and the max times of issuance, I was able to see there were some amazing, or you can almost say crazy outliers, right? So between 2018 and 2020, there was about 90 applications that were able to be processed the same day. So that could be a red flag, or it could just also be a great insight. The municipalities can go ahead, review these applications and see what were the factors that were able to get these applications approved so quickly and create guidelines for these businesses. Finally, was looking into how square footage affected it. So specifically, if we took 2018, there's two businesses, Madison Eats LLC and then the Hudson LLC. And Hudson LLC is a larger cafe, and they requested for 1,300 square footage and a larger number of tables and chairs compared to Madison. But just because they had a larger number of square footage that they were applying for, the average time of issuance of their permit still took about 190 days versus the average that year was 168. Now, looking at Madison Eats, they only requested about 20 square feet and only had a few tables and chairs, and they were able to get their application processed in only 7 days versus the standard of 168. So more information for municipalities to be able to create these guidelines to inform these businesses on how they should prepare these applications so they can be approved in a timely manner. And that is the New York City Sidewalk Cafe data warehouse that I built. Thank you guys for your time. If you have any questions, please go ahead.